You know, I've had some time to reflect on it, and I have to say that I was wrong. I was wrong in thinking that Mark Carney would reverse course and actually try to strengthen ties with America. We're seeing the Carney effect of doubling down, and liberal voters are all for it. Liberal supporters are all for sticking it to America or sticking it to Trump if that means that the price of blueberries double, if the price of grapes double, if the price of anything in Canada doubles, all to rely less on America and more on Poland, Germany, France, the rest of Europe, anybody but America. So I was wrong because I thought that maybe we would see in the first, 60, 90 days, first 4 or 5 months, Mark Carney really start to cave into America. And I was wrong. So now we're dealt with this new reality, the reality that Canada's doomed. The cheapest way of life for us is to be good friends and good neighbors with America. And that doesn't seem to be happening. Carney has an agenda, whether it's selling us out to his European globalist elite friends or whatever. We are seeing the literal relationship between Canada and America is actually over. Not like is over, haha, is actually over. So again, I'd like to apologize. I thought it was maybe a bluff. I thought there's no freaking way this guy's out of his mind, but it's actually over, at least while Mark Carney remains as prime minister. So what are we left with? Well, we're left with higher cost of living, more corruption, and more unnecessary trade disagreements, specifically with the United States. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today is Mark Carney, how he put us into this mess, what this mess actually looks like in the long run, and if we can ever get out of this mess, which the answer to that is simply no. At least not anytime soon. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. It does really help grow the channel more than you could ever imagine. We're going to start off by taking a look at what is actually going on with our trading, because it's not good. And again, I'm sorry that I was wrong, but this is the new reality. Here we go.
Headlines of federal politics. We're joined live by CTV News political commentator Tom Mulcair. Good to see you, Tom. Let's start by talking about this announcement from the Prime Minister's office. Mark Carney saying that there is this critical minerals agreement with Germany now. Yeah. Sounds like there's a chance here for us to really further develop some of our key minerals, including things like nickel.
Exactly. And it's what we have to do because, as Carney has said since the election campaign, our trade relationship with the United States will never be the same. So we've got to start working with partners, and why not start in countries that have a lot in common with us in terms of institutions and past relationships. So he was in Poland, setting up a very big trade deal there, then into Germany, looking at critical minerals and energy, a strategic partnership there, the type of thing that we're going to need to build on for the future, because we have to make sure that we can continue letting the Canadian economy grow. And one of the problems, of course, that we're having right now is the total abject unpredictability of everything coming out of Washington, which leads to your second point. You mentioned Dominic LeBlanc going down to meet with Howard Lutnick. Now, those are two people who have the experience and the expertise to actually get to a deal. Mm-hmm. I think that LeBlanc's been doing a good job, and I think that Lutnick has the ear of President Trump. So let's see if the removal of those extra tariffs, that we pulled off last week. Mr. Carney said, look, we're not going to tariff anything that should be coming in free under the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal. That was a wise move, although it left a lot of people scratching their heads saying that was one of the only things we did to hit back at the U.S. But I think he did the right thing, and there's hope on that horizon as well.
So just because we aren't hitting back against the United States the way that the elbows up chicken dancers wanted us to, doesn't mean that things with the United States are ever going to go back to normal or be better than where they ever were. Mark Carney's made it very clear that he does not want to participate in long-term trade with the United States. Personally, I would like to see these $100 billion+ deals done with America, where American businesses come into Canada and set up their headquarters, their infrastructure, create jobs, add a little bit more money into our economy. That would be freaking phenomenal. I'd like to see American resources go towards developing something like nuclear power here in this country, whether they use it in America doesn't really matter as long as it's in Canada, benefiting our economy to some extent or another. Great. Auto manufacturers, I'd like to see more of that in Canada. I would like to see joint military bases, cell phone providers, internet providers, all that stuff of American companies coming into Canada to make our lives a little bit better, right? Reduce the cost of living. Mark Carney has other plans. Mark Carney doesn't want to do that with Trump. He's made that very clear by, going to Mexico, going to Brazil, going to Poland, going to Germany, going to everybody else but our friendly neighbors. And this is, unfortunately, we're in the final drop. Think of a cliff, right? Or a steady drop. Okay. So it starts, it peaks, it slowly goes down, and then it hits rock bottom. And we're on that final little stretch before we hit rock bottom. Now, there's an argument to be made that that's actually a good thing, because until we hit rock bottom, the majority of Canadians aren't actually going to wake up to the fact that the Liberals are really ruining this country. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, Tom, it's interesting, on that, sort of removing of those sort of counter tariffs there, a lot of people have said, Mark Carney talked a lot about elbows up in the campaign, but it seems he's more taking an elbows down approach. And you've already alluded to the sort of, erratic behavior coming out of the White House here. So what do you make of that approach? Is that the right approach, sort of take tariffs away or counter tariffs away, kind of put the elbows down and try to, talk through this?
That's exactly where we are right now. And I think that the Americans were quite clever on this, because in all the bluster and the baloney that came out of Trump, he was going to tariff absolutely everything under the sun. But when the dust started to settle, Nick, we realized that the Americans had cleverly avoided almost completely touching anything that should come in under the Canada-US-Mexico trade deal. And why is that important? Well, we were putting the Americans on the right side of the negotiation. We were putting them on the right side of the law, and we'd gone in the opposite direction. We, instead of doing what we did with the digital services tax, where we just gave it away without negotiating it, we were right, by the way, to get rid of the thing. It targeted American companies. You can't deny that. But instead of negotiating it away, we just gave away something that could have been part of a larger deal. So this time, at least, we've learned from that. We're no longer negotiating against ourselves. Prime Minister Carney had a very serious talk with Trump about this, and Trump confirmed publicly what Carney had already said was part of their discussion, that getting rid of those counter tariffs was going to open up for a wider discussion and work on the final deal. And I do think that we're going to see a breakthrough very soon.
Well, that's what everybody's hoping for, right? Given the repercussions that we're dealing with every day, depending on what the White House does. Another announcement that came from Carney's office during this trip to Europe, talking about the plans to purchase more submarines for our defense, looking at possibly Germany or South Korea. What do you make of that announcement and those two options coming from those two countries?
Absolutely essential that we start adding to our military capabilities. We've really let the side down within NATO. We're supposed to all be heading to a 5% of GDP expenditure in NATO. This is a perfect example of what Canada has to be doing. We bought some jalopies from the Brits 20 years ago. The things never worked. They were a disaster. And so what we're going to have now are top of the line, extremely modern submarines coming from either South Korea or Germany.
They're not nuclear powered. They're not powered by nuclear energy. They are diesel, which is essentially useless. I mean, it always kind of was useless because they don't stay they don't stay below water for very long, and they can't go very far, whereas nuclear is the opposite. If it's powered by nuclear energy, it can go as far as you'd want it to, and it can stay underwater longer than even the lifespan of those on board. So no, this is not a favorable deal.
If I were to make a bet, I would say the Germans are going to get this contract. And since it's a dozen of this, very high-performing submarine, we're looking at an expenditure of tens of billions of dollars overall. They're not giving the exact figure simply because they don't want to upset the negotiations. But I think that it's a good move. We have 3 oceans. We've got the longest shoreline in the world, and we got almost nothing to throw at it to patrol our own waters. So this will be a good step in the right direction. We've got to build out a great deal more. We'll have no trouble meeting the 5% because we've been so far behind during the Trudeau years.
Yeah, we're playing a real catch-up indeed. Okay, that is CTV News political commentator Tom Mulcair.
Just because it might seem good on the surface does not mean that it's actually good in reality. And even the ambassador to Poland, when talking to CBC, said it was very interesting that Canada chooses to sell oil and gas, right, to America for very, very cheap, like an insane deal, friends and family discount, and then America upsells it to other parts of the world for insane amount of profits. Instead of Canada just doing that from the source of the taps, we do that through America. Very weird. We're just a laughing stock of the world right now. But that's not the only video to give you a little chuckle about Canada or make you want to cry about Canada. We also have this one.
Welcome back to CTV News Channel. I'm Todd Vanderheyden. Prime Minister Carney's mini tour of Europe, in Eastern and Central Europe, continuing today. He is currently in Latvia, touching down in the capital of Riga, the latest leg of his journey to strengthen ties with European allies. Latvia, a country of less than 2 million people, but it is a frontline state, shares a border with Russia. It was occupied by the Soviet Union for 50 years until it finally managed to break away in 1991. Canada does have a contingent of about 1,600 soldiers in Latvia, and today the Prime Minister announced he will increase that footprint as well as extending it by another 3 years. Canada is also looking for new trading partners amid President Trump's trade war against our country, and of course Latvia, along with Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, many countries in that part of the world, very concerned about Russia's ongoing war in nearby Ukraine. Listen to this.
This nation understands how precious freedom is and how precarious freedom can be. That recognition by Canada coming 34 years ago, of course, was after Latvians courageously reclaimed your independence, in this case from the Soviet Unions, going to the barricades at the major buildings, including the parliaments.
All right, so a big announcement there for Canada's military. But earlier today, this was the scene. Mark Carney was in Berlin, Germany, meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The Prime Minister announcing that companies in Germany and South Korea are the final contenders to supply Canada with new submarines, because the ones we have are aging and will be retired in about 10 years from now. Canada needs new subs. It's all part of a huge increase in military spending the Carney government has announced recently. The Prime Minister also announcing a joint declaration on greater cooperation with Germany when it comes to critical minerals. Let's bring in James Moore. He's a former Conservative cabinet minister, served in a number of portfolios. James, always good to see you here today. Let me start, if I can, with this other big news as well, which has to do with Canadian and American trade officials expected to meet in Washington this week. This did come up at a press conference that Mark Carney held earlier this hour. For more details, we just don't know when it's going to happen or what's going to come of it, but what are you anticipating?
Uncertainty. Look at the Canada-U.S. relationship under President Trump is obviously one that's been strained. I think the most useful thing that came out of last week when Prime Minister Carney said that he was going to drop the retaliatory tariffs against the United States was that in a press conference and kind of a side comment, President Trump said that he likes Mark Carney, likes working with him, that the dropping of the reciprocal tariffs was going to lead to some conversations, that he likes the Prime Minister. That's a big step away from calling former Prime Minister Trudeau governor and mocking the 51st state of Canada and saying that we're not a real country. So there seems to be.
Okay, hold on a second. The 51st state of Canada, or Canada becoming the 51st state, is good. Let's just be clear about that. We would have our money exchanged dollar for dollar USD. We would have better infrastructure. We'd have more opportunity, cheaper cost of living. Don't be fooled. That would be a phenomenal experience.
A relationship progress, which hopefully will result in some policy progress.
Yeah, and I wonder as well, how much leverage you think Canada has here. I mean, Carney did lift some of those retaliatory tariffs, maybe an olive branch of sorts or a show of good faith, trying to parse what that means when Donald Trump says, I like Mark Carney. He often, conducts politics on a sort of transactional, personal basis, as you're quite familiar with. But, what does that mean in terms of our actual leverage?
Well, we'll see. I think the leverage that may be coming in a little bit is that the United States is starting to get some tough economic news on the employment side, some conflicts between the White House and the central bank in the United States about where interest rates should be. And, we're starting to see some real impacts, frankly, of Canadians not going to the United States. On any given day, for example, in Las Vegas, Nevada, about 10 to 15% of the economic activity there are Canadians working, coming down and visiting. That's nearly evaporated now.
So there was a time that I didn't believe that. And I can admit that. There was a time where I didn't believe that Canadians were actually boycotting America travel. I personally am not boycotting America travel. I personally am traveling to America with my family in, I think, the next couple of months. But that doesn't mean that I or even you speak, on behalf of the rest of Canada. For example, look at what's going on in Ontario with literally removing American wine, beer, and spirits. That's actually a thing. It still is a thing, even though Canada's countermeasures of the tariffs has been removed and America is like happy and Canada's like, hey, we're also happy, but we're not. We're going to remove, still to this day, American liquor off of our shelves. That's still a thing that's going on. So the boycott against American products or even American destinations is a real thing. Now, it does come with a certain level of hypocrisy because, streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Disney, Prime, YouTube, Gmail, Google in its entirety is, American, but whatever, right? Like, everyone can kind of pick and choose, I guess, what they want to boycott, when they want to boycott it. But the boycott against American places is a real thing. Might not be like a crazy big amount, but I can say there probably are a few 100,000 people, at least 2 million people in this country that are like for jerseys, hardcore boycotting American products. And that's a shame. That just goes to show that the programming in Canada is real, that it's like a real brainwashing, propagandized media. I don't agree with it. I'm trying to help break the shackles of it. It's kind of like the red pill versus blue pill for Neo, which I can say that because I just rewatched all 3 of the original Matrices and the new one that came out during COVID. And so I just am fresh in the red pill, blue pill kind of scene. But yeah. Liberals still want that blue pill. They're not yet ready for the red one. It's a shame.
Some of the impact of Canadians turning their back to the United States, I think, has been noticed. And I think also the president of the United States is getting a little bit of the memo that it's not just that tariffs aren't necessarily good policy. He'll never believe that. But the uncertainty is really, really bad policy. And I think the business community, people around his cabinet table, Secretary Lutnick and others are reporting back to the president gingerly that the uncertainty around the trade file and the tariff file is something that's not good. So whatever the policy of the president is, no matter how misguided we might think it is, I think the message of uncertainty may be penetrating through, and there seems to be a bit of an effort here to get some certainty on the trade and trade file and the tariff file for the Trump presidency.
All right, let's talk about Carney's trip to Europe. So began with a surprise visit to Ukraine on Sunday, as you know. Then he was in Poland, Germany, now Latvia, agreeing to increase Canada's military footprint there, as well as extend it by another 3 years. Your read on what that means here, your takeaways?
Quickly, those 3 countries. Germany is a country that in recent years has cut ties from a country that has supplied them power, Russia, and they're trying to strike a more independent economic profile in the European Union. And that's an interesting thing for Canada, where we look at where we are right now with our relationship with the United States. So
they're trying to get off of Russia and be more on the European Union. So of course it makes sense for Germany to have a deal with Canada because we're the most European of non-European countries. For frick's sakes, man, this world doesn't make any sense. This is all just freaking retarded. Oh my goodness.
lot to learn there, and Germany is an economic powerhouse of Europe, and we have a free trade agreement with Europe, so there's lots of forward momentum towards some economic collaboration with Germany. Second, Poland. Poland has the fastest growing economy in all of Europe right now. I think year over year, north of 5%, 10% growth over the last 5 years. So there's clearly a message there of partnership and reaching across to Europe. Latvia, being in Latvia today, sends a message that Canada's support for Ukraine is not just an issue of solidarity with Ukraine and the Russian invasion there. 20% of Manitobans, about 20% of people of Saskatchewan, 15% of Albertans have Ukrainian lineage, and so there's been this uprising in this effort to have solidarity with Ukraine, because for a lot of Canadians it's a family affair. But I think being in Latvia sends a signal that Canada is supporting NATO and Canada is supporting our European partners, not just because we have a sense of alignment with Ukraine, but also because we have a sense of alignment in the broader mission of confronting an increasingly belligerent and expansionist Russia. That's a bit of a shift in foreign policy done in a subtle way here by the Prime Minister, by saying we're not just standing side by side with Ukraine, we're standing side by side with Europe as they face the threat of increasingly belligerent Russia.
I'm willing to bet, after listening to this, I'm willing to bet, and it's a shame because not as many people make it to the end of the video as they do at the start of the video. But if you'd ever wanted to clip anything I've ever said and repost it on X, this is it. I'm willing to bet that America is going to get a large trade deal with Russia. Could even be around oil and gas or energy before Canada lands a really good deal with America. Because Canada is going against America and doing all of these deals with Europe because we're the most apparently non-European country there is. And we've even gone as far to Mexico and say, hey, SA, hey, cabrons, want to make a deal? And Mexico's like, not behind Trump's back. No pesos, no thank you. And so here we are, left in the void of regret that we didn't secure the bag with America, secure our relationship with America. And I'm freaking willing to bet, man, the odds would be 1,000 to 1 that Trump gets a freaking trade deal going with Russia, which is going to shock the world before Canada secures a really good deal with America. That's my 2 cents. To back that up, I don't have anything other just than my gut feeling, instincts, and just kind of seeing patterns of how global trade is happening, how Canada's going about it, how Canada is still distancing themselves increasingly more and more against America and shifting over to Europe, which is Russia's enemy, kind of, sort of. Well, everyone is technically Russia's enemy, according to our media. And so that's what I think. Let me know down in the comments if you agree, if you disagree. Let me know your reasoning why. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this weird and wacko video. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, it'd be super awesome for you guys to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.